Hi everybody, and welcome back to a special presentation from the Botch Pit. I'm Chris, Librarian of the Pit, and I'm here to explain a convoluted and interesting background. What exactly happened between White Wolf Iterations and Onyx Path Publishing? Why do we have so many names for so many similar games? Well, I'm going to give you a simple explanation first, and then I'll break it down further with some history behind it. So, the long story short and extremely simplified is, in 2004, the original game line known as the World of Darkness ended. It was rebooted the same year. Eventually, the newest iteration of what became White Wolf Publishing would decide that there was way too much money left on the table by leaving behind so many of its beloved lines in the past, and decided it was time to bring them back. If you wanted the super simple breakdown, there you go. Have a good day. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to check out our other videos. But if you really wanted to dig into the differences between these universes and companies, hang around. I'm not done hearing the sound of my own voice as I scream into the void, so I'm going to rant anyways, whether you're here or not. Still here? Awesome. I love you too. Off we go. We're going to start the beginning. Our story begins with Mark Rein-Hagen. This is one cool dude. He was already a gaming industry titan by the time the 90s came around, and while on the road hitting conventions, this guy began to come up with a concept for a game that would shake the entire industry up, not just then, but to this very day for better or for worse. Fortunately, it's mostly the better, and the game would be called, you can guess, Vampire the Masquerade. If you want to seriously comprehend the impact this would have, let alone what it would snowball into, just think about this. Sony has been sued for copying it and banking no less than 4 movies off just the premise founded by Vampire the Masquerade. It has its own conventions. It had its own awesome drama on TV by Aaron Spelling in the 90s, dubbed Kindred the Embraced. It kicked off its own documentary with far more funding than this little recording has, and it's an icon in the industry whether you like it or not. Now, White Wolf as a publisher came into being in 1991, after a merger between White Wolf Magazine and Lion Rampant, a game publisher themselves who seemingly only managed to publish a single game called Whimsy Cards and Ars Magica. It was founded by Mark and Jonathan Tweet. Now, it's good to note that Ars Magica did eventually work its way into Mage the Ascension, but that's a video for another time. For a time, Mark ran White Wolf Publishing, but around 95-96, White Wolf hit some financial headaches, and Mark took the game he was developing for a non-profit, called Exile, and showed himself out. Before he left, he assisted in developing Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, and Wraith the Oblivion. Exile, sadly, would never see any action past a playtest. After leaving White Wolf itself, he briefly served as a screenwriter for Kindred the Embraced, but he decided that sucked too, so once more, he showed himself out. As of 2007, he sold off all his shares of White Wolf and exited tabletop gaming development for quite some time, only recently mentioning some newer projects. Maybe another time we'll come back to Mark for his own breakdown. But as for this story, this is where we leave this awesome and immensely influential personality to the side. Thanks, Mr. Rein-Hagen. Onward to the Post-Rein-Hagen White Wolf. The aforementioned occasion of financial difficulties would unfortunately not be nearly the last time they would stare down the barrel of financial woes. We'll get back to that soon. However, let's talk about what White Wolf kept up with in its post-Mark era. White Wolf would continue to develop and create more games under the World of Darkness setting, including Mummy the Resurrection, Changeling the Dreaming, Orpheus, the Dark Ages line which has all the above supernaturals but in the Dark Ages time frame, and the polarizing but awesome Hunter the Reckoning. They also did numerous card games and other side projects, but as they don't pertain to the topic at hand, this is something to come back to in another recording. Now, this part right here requires some speculation to an extent. What we can know for a fact is that initially, a quote-unquote setting was not part of the game concept when Mark created Vampire the Masquerade. As we know, Werewolf the Apocalypse followed, but to be clear, looking at the first editions, these games were always meant to be insular. As the quote-unquote setting again got more games added, it was clear that they existed in the same universe, but there was no clarified way of having them meet one another or cross over without it being very, very convoluted and requiring storyteller intervention. As someone quite seasoned in crossing the original World of Darkness games over with one another, allow me to say, though some loose rules do exist, these games are not crossover friendly for the most part. Wide power gaps, lack of consistency and knowledge of the other lines, revised and newer editions, etc., etc. To be a storyteller during this age was rough. They knew it, and more importantly, they were aware that the World of Darkness as it stood was very much a product of the 90s, and we went deep into the aughts at that point. It was time to fix some shit. While set in motion almost as early as the games were being made, the end of times, called Time of Judgment, had come upon us. In 2004, White Wolf ended the original setting with a series of books and novels describing various scenarios for storytellers to use to end their worlds. This was met with mixed views. As well, some were glad to have the closure, and the whispers of the reboot setting had crept in well. Many were just clearly still in love with the initial setting. And why not? They were deep, clever, inspiring, and most of all, fun. They didn't see the need to end things. However, the writing was on the wall. White Wolf's money-making power was waning hard with the newest editions of other games out. Dungeons & Dragons had been bought by Wizards of the Coast for TSR some time ago, and they were aggressively kicking the shit out of the market. Their 3.5, released in 2003, was very strong, and a massive improvement over their initial 3rd edition, driving fans their way. Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu was also slated for a 2004 release with their newest edition, 6th I believe, and many fans of horror were still adoring their 2001 20th anniversary release, driving attention further away from the World of Darkness and towards other horror avenues. It had gotten stagnant, and people knew. For their reboot, White Wolf thought they were being very clever. They would cheat off the smart kids for their new releases. For now, titled The New World of Darkness, very clever, though only called The World of Darkness on their covers, they would release a single core for mortals and setting and build off of it, the way Wizards built off of their trinity of Player's Guide, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual. Each book to follow would be built assuming you had and knew the core World of Darkness book, and thus they would, in theory, be able to dedicate the entire new cores to whatever they were about. For example, Vampire the Requiem launched at the same time as the core, and since White Wolf assumed you had it, it contained no rules aside from just pertaining to vampires. There were no just regular dynamic systems. There were no rules for creating the mortal for the template. It was very much, this is vampire, fucking deal with it. Their new system was called the Storyteller System, and it was meant to be a much safe-over, crossover-friendly system, with a fuel stat and a power stat primarily. Regardless, despite the reboot and hype, and also despite launching both Werewolf the Forsaken and Mage the Awakening in 2005, White Wolf would be deciding to merge with CCP Games, the creator and publisher of such MMORPGs as EVE Online, for future stability and financial fortitude. This was announced at an EVE Online FanFest, and a tentative plan to make a World of Darkness MMORPG was announced, though in 2014, this was officially declared dead. I digress. White Wolf went on to publish more game lines, many of them now unique to their line and not just reboots anymore. This is where Promethean the Created, Geist the Sin Eaters, Hunter the Vigil, and Changeling the Lost come in. While Changeling was pretty much universally lauded, Promethean and Geist were both addressed in having heavy flaws by the fanbase. Promethean was only good to play one-on-one due to some conflicting rule sets, and Geist was an editorial pit of hell shit. Yeah, I'm coining that phrase, don't be shocked if you see it again. Geist First Edition's a fucking nightmare. Anyway, done. From there, we land ourselves on an enormous year in the timeline of this video. At Gen Con 2012, White Wolf CCP announced from that on out they were no longer going to be producing tabletop games themselves. Instead, a new company formed by White Wolf creative director Richard Thomas had purchased the licenses to the World of Darkness game line, and they would be taking it from there. They had secretly formed in January 2012 and had also bought the rights to make product for Exalted and outright bought Trinity and Scion outright. So again, just to clarify, they bought and retained the licenses to the World of Darkness stuff in Exalted, but they legit just straight out bought the rights to Trinity and Scion. I find that very interesting, especially with the second edition of Scion coming out. Another thing we'll touch on in another video. So, Onyx Path, the company formed by Thomas, would utilize entirely different tactics for their publishing. Seeing and taking heed of the financial risks, they utilized crowdfunding from fans, as well as self-publishing book suppliers to offset their costs. Things like Drive-Thru RPG and One Bookshelf, both that Richard Thomas is also actually very active in as far as their management, would be taking over the print-on-demand stuff. During this time, they would also create Mummy the Cursed and Demon the Descent, both on Kickstarter and crowdfunded. And of course, Beast the Primordial, but not that that's a footnote or anything, but yeah, it's definitely a fucking footnote. This brings us to October 29th, 2015. While before CCP and White Wolf had been a lateral effort, it turned out that CCP and Paradox Interactive, a creator of many historical and strategic games, had collaborated in an effort to purchase White Wolf Publishing as a whole. This came with many fears and concerns, namely, what happens to the new World of Darkness? Paradox had made it clear from the get-go that it had every intention of resurrecting the highly recognizable, marketable, and just in general loved original World of Darkness, recognizing the brand's strength. Werewolf the Apocalypse, Vampire, you gotta remember, back then, Vampire had already had 1 or 2 successful video games. Hunter had, I think, 3. Like, there was strength there that was just left on the table. So, let's take a second and think about this. No matter how you cut it, Vampire the Requiem, no, the whole New World of Darkness line, failed to capture the original audience that those other lines had. Yes, the original World of Darkness was extremely, even to a point exasperatingly, cringy. They were a product of the times, but humans are nothing if not nostalgic. And with the intent of bringing back the original World of Darkness, wouldn't the New World of Darkness line not just be a confusing other member of the publishing world, but also almost competition for the fan base wallet? The stress of that time was real. Fortunately, Onyx Path and this new iteration of White Wolf, now owned by Paradox CCP, was nothing if not strategic and patient. See, at this point, the New World of Darkness also did have an audience, mostly newer players that had not been aboard the original World of Darkness hype train, and nobody wanted to lose that audience. And then you also had many people like myself that were original World of Darkness people, but saw sometimes you do just need to take things in a new direction. And despite what many people will say, the New World of Darkness is very strong. The Chronicles of Darkness now, but again, I'll touch on that in a second. So, it was announced in December 2015 that Onyx Path would be changing the name of its New World of Darkness line to the Chronicles of Darkness. They had not only maintained their publishing rights, but they were fully down to clown with the House of the Wolf, and they'd be assisting with future efforts on the original World of Darkness line as well, now called the One World of Darkness. Of course, not all would go super smoothly with the efforts of the House of the Wolf, but I'll save that for another breakdown, if anyone is interested. So, now you have the original World of Darkness, which is now resuscitated and called the One World of Darkness. You could also call it the original World of Darkness. And what was called the New World of Darkness had officially become the Chronicles of Darkness. So really, Chronicles of Darkness is almost just New World of Darkness 2nd Edition. And they rebranded it to keep it alive and keep, the House of the Wolf from having any concerns of competition. So, there we go. An explanation as to what the differences are in the game lines as to why they have such a convoluted, confusing name for their books. Yes, all the New World of Darkness books are meant to work with the Chronicles of Darkness book line, as really Chronicles is, again, just the 2nd edition of the New World of Darkness. I truly hope you found this useful and that it explains all the naming issues of the lines. I actually had a real good time writing this, as this was more editorial versus guide stuff or gameplay, and that poses the question, what next? Would you rather see me break down the differences of the original game lines and their Onyx Path reboot versions first? Or a breakdown of the drama and controversy on the release of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, leading to White Wolf no longer developing books internally at all? You let me know in the comments. Thanks as always for listening and spending some time down in the pit. We truly and deeply appreciate you. See you next time.